There aren't a lot of characters in the book of Job, but each one has a very specific role to play. The author of Job tells you so. You can look for clues in his language. The author of Job wanted to be sure you got the message. Not every character in this book is a reliable narrator. In other words, you're not supposed to trust everyone in this story. Certain characters' words carry more weight than others. Let's start by looking at the characters of Job's three friends, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite. All three of these men respond to Job's suffering by presenting a very traditional view of God, as a deity who punishes the wicked and preserves and rewards the righteous. Bildad puts the three friends' perspective of Job bluntly when he calls Job's protestations of innocence a blustering wind, and then adds, "Does God pervert justice? Does the Almighty pervert what is right?" In other words, these three men take refuge in a black and white view of morality and the way God enforces that morality in the human scene. If that seems a little fishy to you, good. The poet who wrote Job definitely wants you to feel that way. You can tell because the poetry he assigns to Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar is mostly boilerplate poetry. Their words are often formulaic and borrow from traditional constructions elsewhere in the Bible. That's supposed to make you skeptical of the wisdom they offer to Job. Hint, the poet is telling you that it's not very wise after all, and that their view of God is definitely skewed. By contrast, Job, the main character of our story, is given vivid and powerful language for the expression of his anguish. He draws metaphors from every corner of the world to explore and reject his suffering. Look for the metaphoric use of weaving, meteorology, and even food preparation in Job's speeches. Job's poetry gives him an authority and credibility that his friends don't have. It's dynamic and arresting. We're supposed to listen to Job and, as fellow human beings, relate to his confusion, to his cries for justice, and to his declarations of innocence. But even Job's poetry doesn't compare to the poetry that the poet behind the book of Job assigns to God. That's because God is the only truly reliable voice in this story. His words, and only his words, get at the true nature of who he is, what he does, and what his creation looks like. They're the only words that move us completely away from the question of suffering to a God-centered perspective. The poet tells you to trust God, and only God, by fashioning the most dynamic, complex, and inventive poetry for him. As original as Job's metaphors are, the poet takes God's metaphors even further. In the end, God's speeches don't just point out the limits of the human perspectives that the earlier characters have offered up. His poetry actually annihilates the vivid images of suffering from earlier in the story, replacing them with a singular and glorious view of God and creation.